The woman stumbled into Durango, Colorado on a scorching afternoon in July of 1878, her feet bleeding so badly they left crimson prints in the dust. And when the tall cowboy asked her name, she just shook her head and looked at him with eyes that held more secrets than the canyon walls held shadows. Dalton Shepard had been loading supplies onto his wagon outside Morrison's general store when he first saw her. She moved like a ghost, swaying with each step, her dress torn and filthy, her dark hair matted with what looked like dried blood. She couldn't have been more than 22 or 23, though the dirt and exhaustion made it hard to tell. He dropped the sack of flour he'd been holding and ran to catch her just as her knees buckled. "Easy now," he said, steadying her with strong hands. "I've got you." She looked up at him, her green eyes struggling to focus. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. He could feel her trembling against him, her whole body shaking like a leaf in a storm. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked gently. She shook her head, then winced as if even that small movement caused her pain. "Where did you come from?" Another shake of her head, more forceful this time. Her eyes held a desperate plea that he understood without words. "Don't ask. Don't make me tell." Dalton was 26 years old and had seen his share of trouble in these parts. He knew when someone was running from something bad. He also knew that a woman in her condition wouldn't last another hour out in this heat without help. "All right," he said softly. "You don't have to tell me anything, but those feet of yours need tending and you need water and shade. My ranch is about 3 miles out of town. You're welcome to stay there until you're feeling better." She stared at him for a long moment, searching his face as if trying to determine whether she could trust him. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she gave a small nod. "Can you walk to the wagon?" She tried to take a step and cried out, nearly collapsing again. Without hesitation, Dalton swept her up into his arms. She weighed hardly anything, like she hadn't eaten properly in weeks. As he carried her to the wagon, he could feel people staring, could hear the whispers starting up and down the main street. Durango wasn't a large town, and news traveled fast. "Dalton Shepard, what in heaven's name are you doing?" Mrs. Morrison had come out of the store, her face pinched with disapproval. "Helping someone who needs it, madam," he replied evenly. "You don't know anything about that girl. She could be a thief or worse. She's hurt and alone. That's all I need to know." He settled the woman as gently as he could on the wagon bench, then climbed up beside her. She had pulled her feet up, trying to hide the bloody soles, but he'd already seen them. Whatever she'd been through, she'd walked a long way to get here. The ride out to his ranch was quiet except for the creaking of the wagon and the clip-clop of the horses' hooves. Dalton kept glancing at her, making sure she wasn't about to faint and fall off the bench. She sat rigid, staring straight ahead, her hands clutched in her lap. "You're safe now," he said after a while. "I promise you that. Whatever you're running from, it's not going to find you at my place." A single tear rolled down her cheek, cutting a clean path through the dirt. She didn't wipe it away. The Shepard Ranch sat in a valley between 2 ridges, with the Animas River running along the eastern boundary. It wasn't the biggest spread in the area, but Dalton had built it up from nothing over the past 5 years. The main house was simple but solid, made of pine logs he'd cut and shaped himself. There was a barn, a chicken coop, a small stable, and several corrals. About 24 cattle grazed in the pastures. He pulled the wagon up to the house and helped the woman down. This time she let him carry her without protest. Inside, the house was neat and sparse. The main room had a stone fireplace, a wooden table with 4 chairs, and a rocking chair by the window. There were 2 bedrooms, one of which had belonged to his younger sister Sarah before she'd married and moved to Denver. Dalton carried the woman to Sarah's room and laid her on the bed. I'm going to get some water and bandages. Don't try to move." In the kitchen, he pumped fresh water into a basin and gathered clean cloths, soap, and the medical supplies he kept in a tin box. When he returned to the bedroom, she was still lying exactly where he'd left her, staring at the ceiling with those haunted green eyes. "This is going to hurt," he warned as he knelt beside the bed and began to clean her feet. She bit her lip but didn't cry out, even when he had to pick small stones and thorns from her torn flesh. He worked as gently as he could, washing away the blood and dirt, then applying salve and wrapping her feet in clean bandages. "You walked a long way," he said quietly. "These wounds are days old." She didn't respond. "You hungry?" A slight nod. "I'll make us some supper." "There's a pitcher of water on the nightstand and a clean dress in the wardrobe that belonged to my sister. You're about the same size, I think. The wash basin is over there if you want to clean up. Can you manage on your own, or do you need help?" She cleared her throat, and when she spoke, her voice came out rough and cracked. "I can manage, thank you." They were the first words he'd heard her say. Her accent was educated, Eastern perhaps. Philadelphia or Boston, maybe. Definitely not from around here. "Take your time," he said. "I'll be in the kitchen." He left her alone and went to start supper. He wasn't much of a cook, but he could manage beans and cornbread and salt pork. While the food cooked, he went out to tend to the horses and finish unloading the supplies from the wagon. The sun was starting to sink toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. When he came back inside, she was sitting at the table. She'd washed her face and hands and changed into Sarah's blue calico dress. Her hair was still damp from where she tried to clean it. Even exhausted and bruised, she was beautiful. There was something delicate about her features, but also a strength in the set of her jaw and the way she held herself despite everything she'd been through. "Feeling better?" he asked. "Yes, thank you for your kindness." He served up the food and sat down across from her. She ate slowly but steadily, like someone who'd been hungry for a long time but didn't want to make herself sick by eating too fast. "I know you don't want to tell me your name," Dalton said, "but I can't just keep calling you. Would it be all right if I gave you one? Just for while you're here?" She looked up at him, surprised. "You would do that? Well, I figure if you won't give me a name and you won't tell me where you came from, at least I can call you something. How about Olivia? That was my mother's name." Something softened in her expression. "Olivia, that's beautiful." She was beautiful, smart too, and tough as they come. She had to be, raising 2 kids out here after my father died. "Where is she now?" "Passed away 3 years ago, pneumonia." He paused. "So what do you think?" "Can I call you Olivia?" She considered this for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, I would like that." They finished eating in comfortable silence. Afterward, Dalton cleared the dishes while she sat in the rocking chair by the window, watching the last light fade from the sky. He could see the exhaustion weighing on her, the way her eyelids kept drooping. "You should get some rest," he said. "We can figure out everything else tomorrow." "Everything else?" "Well, you can't walk around barefoot forever. I noticed you didn't have any shoes when I found you. Tomorrow I'll see if I can find you a pair that fit. Might have to ride back into town, but that's no trouble." She looked down at her bandaged feet. "I had shoes. I lost them crossing the river." "Which river?" She caught herself, shook her head. "It doesn't matter, all right. But you still need shoes. And you need a last name too if you're going to be staying around here. People in town are going to ask questions, especially after they saw me bringing you out here today." "What will you tell them?" "The truth. That I found a woman in need and offered her help." "But they're going to want to know who you are." She was quiet for a long time, staring out at the darkness. "Tell them I'm your cousin from back east, visiting for a while. And your last name, Rivers." She said it without hesitation, and he wondered if she was thinking about that river she'd mentioned, the one where she'd lost her shoes. "Olivia Rivers it is, then. Welcome to Colorado, cousin." The ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Thank you, Dalton, for everything. You didn't have to help me, but you did. I won't forget that. Get some sleep, Olivia. Things will look better in the morning." She stood up carefully, testing her weight on her bandaged feet, and made her way slowly to the bedroom. Dalton waited until he heard the door close, then banked the fire and settled himself on a blanket near the hearth. He usually slept in the other bedroom, but he didn't want her to feel uncomfortable, and he wanted to be close by in case she needed anything during the night. He lay awake for a long time, listening to the familiar sounds of the house, settling and thinking about the mysterious woman now sleeping in his sister's bed. He knew he should probably be more cautious. Mrs. Morrison was right that he didn't know anything about her. But there was something about Olivia that tugged at his heart. The fear in her eyes, the way she flinched at loud noises, the desperate relief when he'd said she was safe here. Someone had hurt her badly, that much was clear. And Dalton Shepard had never been the kind of man who could turn his back on someone in need. The next morning, he woke to the smell of coffee brewing. He sat up, confused, and saw Olivia standing at the stove. She'd found his coffee pot and had somehow managed to make breakfast despite her injured feet. There were eggs frying in the pan and fresh biscuits on the table. "You should be resting," he said, getting to his feet. "I wanted to help. You've done so much for me already. How are your feet?" "Sore, but better." The salve helped. They ate together, and Dalton found himself studying her in the morning light. She had dark brown hair that fell past her shoulders in soft waves, and those striking green eyes that seemed to change shade depending on her mood. She was probably around 22, he guessed, though there was a weariness about her that made her seem older. "I need to ride into town today," he said. "Get you those shoes and pick up the supplies I dropped yesterday. You'll be all right here on your own." A flicker of fear crossed her face. "Will you be gone long?" "A few hours at most. I'll be back before noon." "All right." She tried to sound brave, but he could hear the tremor in her voice. "There's a rifle by the door if you need it. You know how to shoot?" "Yes." "Good. Anyone comes around that you don't recognize, you stay inside and keep that rifle handy. But I don't expect any trouble. We don't get many visitors out here." He saddled his horse, a sturdy bay mare named Rosie, and rode toward town. The morning was already getting hot, promising another scorching day. As he rode, he thought about what Olivia had said about losing her shoes in a river. The nearest river crossing was the Animas, right near his property. But there were other rivers within a few days' walk. The Dolores, the San Juan, even the Rio Grande if she'd come up from the south. She could have come from anywhere. In town, he went first to Morrison's general store. Mrs. Morrison gave him a sharp look when he walked in. "That girl still at your place, Dalton Shepard?" "She's my cousin, visiting from back east," he said evenly. "Her name is Olivia Rivers." "Is that so? Funny how you never mentioned having a cousin before. Didn't seem relevant before she showed up." He kept his tone pleasant but firm. "I need to see what you have in ladies' shoes, size 6 or 7, I'd guess." Mrs. Morrison pursed her lips but led him to a shelf where she kept boots and shoes. "These just came in from Denver. Good quality leather." Dalton picked out a sturdy pair of brown boots that looked like they'd fit and wouldn't be too hard on Olivia's injured feet. He also bought stockings, a sunbonnet, and a shawl. Mrs. Morrison watched him with narrowed eyes as he counted out the money. "You're spending an awful lot on this cousin of yours." "Family takes care of family, Mrs. Morrison." He collected the supplies he'd abandoned the day before and loaded everything onto Rosie. Before leaving town, he stopped at the telegraph office. There might be wanted posters or missing person notices that could tell him who Olivia really was. But the board was empty except for a notice about a missing cow and an advertisement for a traveling preacher coming through next month. The ride back to the ranch seemed to take longer than usual. He found himself anxious to get home, to make sure Olivia was all right. When he finally arrived, he saw smoke coming from the chimney and could hear the chickens clucking in their coop. Everything looked peaceful. Olivia met him at the door, still holding the rifle. She'd clearly been watching for him from the window. Her whole body relaxed when she saw it was him. "No trouble?" he asked. "No one came by?" He showed her the boots and other things he'd bought. Her eyes widened when she saw them. "This is too much. I can't accept all this." "You need shoes, don't you? And you can't wear the same dress every day. But I have no way to pay you back. I'm not asking you to. Consider it a gift from your cousin." He gave her a gentle smile. She held the boots like they were made of gold, her fingers tracing the stitching. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. Just try them on and make sure they fit." She sat down and carefully pulled on the stockings, wincing a little as the fabric touched her bandaged feet, but when she slipped on the boots, she smiled. "They're perfect." Over the next few days, they fell into an easy rhythm. Dalton would tend to the ranch work while Olivia, despite his protests, insisted on helping with the cooking and cleaning. Her feet healed quickly, and he could see her growing stronger and more confident with each passing day. She still jumped at sudden noises and kept the rifle close by when he was out working, but the terror he'd seen in her eyes that first day was gradually fading. They talked while they worked, though she was always careful to steer the conversation away from her past. He told her about growing up on the ranch, about his father who died in a mining accident when Dalton was 15, about his mother who'd kept the ranch going through sheer determination, about Sarah who'd fallen in love with a banker from Denver and moved to the city. "You miss her?" Olivia asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Every day. We were always close, Sarah and me, but she's happy and that's what matters. She and Thomas have a good life in Denver." "Have you ever thought about getting married?" he shrugged. "Hasn't been the right person, I guess, and ranching doesn't leave much time for courting." "What about you?" He saw her stiffen, saw the shutters come down behind her eyes. "No," she said quietly. "There's no one." He wanted to ask more, wanted to know what had put that look of pain on her face, but he'd promised himself he wouldn't push. She'd tell him when she was ready, or she wouldn't. Either way, he'd respect her privacy. A week after her arrival, they were working together in the vegetable garden behind the house when they heard horses approaching. Olivia's head snapped up, her face going pale. Without a word, she ran for the house. Dalton straightened up, shading his eyes against the sun. 3 riders were coming up the road. As they got closer, he recognized Sheriff Tom Brennan and 2 of his deputies. "Afternoon, Dalton," the sheriff called out as they reined in their horses. "Tom, what brings you out this way?" "Had some interesting news come through the telegraph office yesterday. There's a man down in Santa Fe looking for a woman who went missing about 2 weeks ago. Name of Oliver Rutherford." The sheriff watched Dalton's face carefully. "Ring any bells?" Dalton kept his expression neutral. "Can't say it does. This Rutherford fellow, he's some kind of big shot. Rich family from Philadelphia. Says his wife ran away from him. He's offering a substantial reward for information leading to her return." "What's that got to do with me?" "Well, word around town is you brought a strange woman out to your place last week. Woman who showed up with no shoes and wouldn't give her name. Seems like quite a coincidence, don't you think? The woman at my place is my cousin Olivia. She's visiting from back east." "Your cousin?" The sheriff's tone made it clear he didn't believe that for a second. "Mind if we talk to her, just to clear things up?" I do mind, actually. She's family, Tom, not some criminal you can just interrogate. Now, Dalton, I'm not accusing anyone of anything. But this Rutherford is threatening to come up here himself if we don't cooperate with his inquiry. Says his wife is mentally unstable, that she's dangerous to herself. Says she needs to be brought home for her own protection. Dalton felt anger rising in his chest. He'd seen the fear in Olivia's eyes, the way she flinched from loud voices. Whatever the truth was about her past, he was certain of one thing. She was running from Oliver Rutherford for a damn good reason. Even if I did know anything about this missing woman, which I don't, seems to me that a wife has the right to leave a husband if she wants to. Not according to the law, she doesn't. A man has rights over his wife. And what about her rights? The sheriff sighed. Look, I don't like this any more than you do, but my job is to uphold the law. If this woman is Oliver Rutherford's wife, she needs to be returned to him. That's just how it is. Well, like I said, the woman staying here is my cousin. So unless you've got a warrant or some actual evidence of wrongdoing, I'm going to have to ask you to leave my property. The two men stared at each other for a long moment. Finally, the sheriff nodded. All right, Dalton, but this isn't over. Rutherford is connected to some powerful people. If his wife is here, it's going to come out eventually. Then I guess we don't have anything to worry about, do we? The sheriff and his deputies turned their horses and rode away. Dalton stood watching until they disappeared from view, then went into the house. He found Olivia in her room, sitting on the bed with her arms wrapped around herself, shaking. "They're gone," he said gently. "He found me. He actually found me." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Olivia, I need you to tell me the truth. Are you Oliver Rutherford's wife?" She looked up at him, and the anguish in her eyes made his heart clench. Slowly, she nodded. "My real name is Ophelia Rutherford." The words seemed to cost her something. "I ran away from him 3 weeks ago. I've been running ever since." "Why? What did he do to you?" She was quiet for a long moment, then began to speak in a flat, emotionless voice that was somehow worse than if she'd been crying. "We were married 6 months ago. It was arranged by our families. I didn't love him, but I thought I could learn to. I thought he was a gentleman." She laughed bitterly. "I was so naive. The first time he hit me was on our wedding night. I'd said something that displeased him. After that, it got worse. He said I belonged to him, that he could do whatever he wanted with me. The servants knew what was happening, but no one would help me. His family is too powerful, too wealthy. I tried to go to my own family, but they said I was being dramatic, that all marriages have their difficulties, that I needed to be a better wife." Dalton felt sick. "So you ran." "I waited until he went on a business trip to Santa Fe. I took some money from his desk and left in the middle of the night. I didn't even pack a bag because I was afraid someone would notice. I just walked out of the house and kept walking. I bought passage on a stagecoach heading north, but Oliver must have discovered I was gone sooner than I expected. The coach was stopped by some men he'd hired. I ran into the trees and kept running. I walked for days. I lost my shoes crossing a river. I ate berries and drank from streams. I just wanted to get far enough away that he'd never find me. And then you came to Durango." She nodded. "I thought I was safe. I thought I was far enough away, but I should have known. Oliver doesn't give up. He never gives up." Her voice broke. "He's going to make them send me back to him, isn't he?" "No." Dalton said it with absolute certainty. "That's not going to happen. You heard the sheriff. The law says I belong to Oliver. The law is wrong." He crossed the room and knelt in front of her, taking her cold hands in his. "Listen to me, Ophelia. I'm not going to let anyone take you back to a man who hurt you. I don't care how rich or powerful he is. You can't stop him. No one can. Maybe not alone, but I know people. We'll figure something out." She looked at him with those heartbreaking green eyes. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me. I know enough. I know you're brave and strong. I know you'd rather walk until your feet bled than stay with a man who hurt you. I know you deserve better than what you've been given." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "And I know that in the week you've been here, I've come to care about what happens to you. A lot more than I probably should." Something shifted in her expression. "Dalton, you don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know that you're not alone in this, not anymore." She squeezed his hands, and for the first time since the sheriff had arrived, he saw hope in her eyes instead of fear. That evening, Dalton rode out to his nearest neighbor, a grizzled rancher named Jack Murphy who'd been working this land since before Colorado was even a state. If anyone knew how to handle a tricky legal situation, it was Jack. The old man listened to the story while puffing on his pipe, his weathered face thoughtful. "Seems to me," he said when Dalton finished, "that the simplest solution is for the girl to stop being Rutherford's wife. Divorce isn't exactly easy, Jack, and it still wouldn't protect her from him." "Who said anything about divorce?" Jack's eyes twinkled. "If she's married to someone else, then she can't very well be Rutherford's wife anymore, can she?" It took Dalton a moment to understand what the old man was suggesting. "You mean?" "I mean that if this Ophelia were to marry you, she'd be Mrs. Shepard, not Mrs. Rutherford. The law's pretty clear on that. A woman can't be married to two men at once. First marriage would be invalidated." "I don't think it works that way." "Sure it does. Happens all the time out here in the territories. Man thinks his wife died back east, comes out here and remarries. Then the first wife shows up alive and well. Second marriage takes precedence. First one gets annulled. That's different. There was deception involved. And there's no deception here. This Rutherford told everyone his wife was mentally unstable. Sounds like deception to me. He married that girl under false pretenses, pretending to be a gentleman when he was really a brute. Any judge worth his salt would see that marriage wasn't valid. Dalton rode back to the ranch with his head spinning. Marriage to Ophelia. The idea should have seemed crazy. He'd known her for barely a week. But the thought of her being his wife, of having the right to protect her not just as a friend but as a husband, felt strangely right. When he got home, he found her in the kitchen, preparing supper. She'd been crying. He could see the redness around her eyes. "I've been thinking," she said without looking at him. "Maybe it would be better if I just left, went somewhere else. I've already brought you enough trouble. You're not going anywhere. Dalton, that sheriff is going to come back, and when Oliver arrives, it's going to get ugly. I don't want you to suffer because of me. What if there was a way to make it so Rutherford had no claim on you at all?" She turned to face him. "What do you mean?" He took a deep breath. "Marry me." The wooden spoon she'd been holding clattered to the floor. "What? I know it sounds crazy. And I know we barely know each other. But think about it, Ophelia. If you're married to me, you're not married to him. The law can't force you to go back to a man who's not your husband. That's not how marriage works. I'm already married. To a man who beat you, who you married under duress. Any decent judge would see that marriage wasn't valid. But even if they didn't, you being married to me would complicate things enough that Rutherford might just give up and go home." She shook her head. "I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking, I'm offering. But marriage is forever. You'd be tied to me, to all my problems for the rest of your life." He stepped closer to her. "Would that really be so terrible? You don't know me. Not really. I could be awful. I could have terrible habits. I could snore or burn every meal, or you're rambling. I'm trying to talk you out of a very bad idea. It's not a bad idea. It's actually a pretty good one." He reached out and gently touched her cheek. "And for what it's worth, I'd like to get to know you better. The real you, not the frightened woman who stumbled into town. I've seen glimpses of her this past week. She's funny and smart, and she makes the best biscuits I've ever tasted. I'd like to spend more time with her, Dalton. Her voice was soft, uncertain. I'm not saying we have to make this a real marriage right away. We can take our time, get to know each other. But at least if we're married, you'll be safe. You'll have legal protection. And you won't have to keep looking over your shoulder, waiting for someone to drag you back to Philadelphia. She was quiet for a long time, and he could see her thinking it through, weighing the options. Finally, she looked up at him. Are you sure about this? Really sure? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Then yes, I'll marry you. They were married 3 days later by the traveling preacher who happened to be passing through Durango. Dalton bought Ophelia a simple white dress from Mrs. Morrison, who was clearly scandalized by how quickly this supposed cousin had become a bride. Jack Murphy stood as witness, along with Sarah's old friend Emma Davis, who ran the town's boarding house and was one of the few people who'd been kind to Ophelia when news of her presence had spread through town. The ceremony was brief and simple. Dalton had never been one for fancy words, and Ophelia was too nervous to do more than whisper her vows. But when the preacher said, "You may kiss your bride," and Dalton leaned in to press his lips softly to hers, something passed between them. A promise. A hope. The beginning of something real. That night, Dalton made a bed for himself on the floor of the main room, giving Ophelia the privacy of her own bedroom. She'd looked at him strangely when he'd brought out the blankets. "We're married now," she'd said quietly. "You don't have to sleep on the floor." "I know. But I meant what I said about taking our time. I don't want you to feel pressured. When you're ready, if you're ready, you'll let me know." She'd looked at him with such gratitude and something else, something warmer, that he'd had to turn away before he did something foolish like sweep her into his arms. 2 days after the wedding, Oliver Rutherford arrived in Durango. Dalton was in the barn when he heard the commotion. By the time he got to the house, Ophelia was standing on the porch with the rifle in her hands, and a well-dressed man in his mid-30s was climbing down from an expensive carriage. "Ophelia," the man said, his voice smooth as silk. "Thank God I've found you. I've been so worried." "Stay away from me, Oliver. Darling, you're not well. You're confused. Come home with me and we'll get you the help you need." "I'm not confused and I'm not going anywhere with you." That's when Oliver noticed Dalton approaching. His eyes narrowed. "Who are you, Dalton Shepard?" "Ophelia's husband." Oliver's face went red. "Her what?" "Her husband. We were married 4 days ago, which means whatever claim you think you had on her is null and void." "That's impossible. She's my wife." "Not anymore, she's not." Oliver turned back to Ophelia, and Dalton saw the mask slip for just a moment. Saw the rage in those cold eyes. "You think you're very clever, don't you? But this changes nothing. You're still my wife in the eyes of God and the law. This sham marriage means nothing." "It means everything," Ophelia said, her voice stronger now. "It means I'm free of you. You'll never be free of me." Oliver's voice dropped to a menacing whisper. "I own you, Ophelia. Your father sold you to me like a piece of property. You can run to the ends of the earth and it won't change that fact." Dalton stepped between them. "I think it's time for you to leave. I'm not going anywhere without my wife. She's not your wife, and if you don't get back in that carriage right now, I'm going to help you into it. With my fists." For a moment, Dalton thought Oliver might actually take a swing at him, but then the man seemed to collect himself. He smoothed down his jacket and smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Fine, keep her, but this isn't over. I have lawyers. I have friends in very high places. I'll make sure both of you regret this." He climbed back into his carriage and signaled the driver to leave. Dalton and Ophelia stood watching until the dust settled behind them. "He meant that," Ophelia said quietly. "About the lawyers. He'll do everything he can to destroy us. Let him try. We've got right on our side. Right doesn't always win. Maybe not, but we will, together. She looked up at him and he saw tears in her eyes. I'm sorry I brought this into your life. Hey, he tilted her chin up gently. You didn't bring anything but light into my life. Don't apologize for that. She set down the rifle and stepped into his arms. He held her close, feeling her heart racing against his chest. They stood like that for a long time, drawing strength from each other. Over the next few weeks, they waited for Oliver's next move. But nothing came. No lawyers, no marshals, no threats. It was like he'd simply vanished. Maybe he gave up, Ophelia suggested one evening as they sat together on the porch. Men like that don't give up. He's planning something. Should we be worried? Probably. But I'm not going to let fear run our lives. He reached over and took her hand. We're going to keep living, keep building our life here. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. She laced her fingers through his. Over the past weeks, they'd grown closer. There were small touches now, hands brushing as they worked side by side, shoulders pressed together as they sat watching the sunset. Sometimes Dalton would catch her watching him with a look that made his heart race. And sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, he'd study the curve of her smile, the way her hair caught the light, the graceful movement of her hands as she kneaded bread or mended a shirt. "Dalton," she said softly, "can I ask you something? Anything? Do you regret it? Marrying me?" He turned to look at her fully. "Not for 1 second, do you? No, that's what surprises me. I thought I'd never want to be married again after Oliver. I thought all men were like him deep down. But you're different. You're kind and patient and good. You make me feel safe." She paused. "You make me feel things I didn't think I was capable of feeling anymore." "What kind of things?" She met his eyes. "Happy, hopeful, like maybe there's a future worth having." She took a shaky breath. "Like maybe I could learn to love again." His heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. "Ophelia, I know we said we'd take our time, and I know you probably don't feel the same way about me, but I wanted you to know that I'm grateful for every day I get to spend with you. You saved my life, Dalton. Not just when you found me in town, but every day since then. You gave me a reason to keep going." He cupped her face in his hands. "I do feel the same way. I have for a while now. I was just afraid to say it, afraid you'd think I expected something from you because of the marriage." "What if I want you to expect something? Ophelia, are you saying?" Instead of answering, she leaned forward and kissed him. It was different from the brief peck at their wedding. This was real, deep, full of all the emotion they'd been holding back. Dalton pulled her closer, his fingers tangling in her hair, and she made a soft sound against his mouth that sent heat flooding through him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "Are you sure about this?" "I've never been more sure of anything." He stood up and offered her his hand. She took it, and he led her inside through the main room to his bedroom. The door closed softly behind them. Later, much later, they lay tangled together in his bed, the moonlight streaming through the window casting silver patterns on the walls. Ophelia's head was on his chest, her hair spilled across his shoulder. He traced lazy circles on her back, feeling completely at peace for the first time in longer than he could remember. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I know it's fast and crazy, but I do." "I love you, Dalton Shepard." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I love you too, Ophelia Shepard, and there's nothing crazy about it. Sometimes you just know. Thank you for seeing me that day, for not turning away. I couldn't have turned away if I'd wanted to. You were meant to find me." "I'm sure of it." She lifted her head to look at him, her eyes shining in the moonlight. "You really believe that?" "I do. Out of all the places you could have ended up, all the people who might have found you, you came to Durango. To me, that's not coincidence, that's fate." She smiled and kissed him again, slow and sweet. "Then I guess I should thank fate. We both should." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, finally allowing themselves to believe that maybe, just maybe, they'd found something worth holding on to. The peaceful weeks that followed felt like a gift. Dalton taught Ophelia how to ride a horse, and they spent long afternoons exploring the valley and the mountain trails. She proved to be a natural horsewoman, sitting tall in the saddle with her hair flying behind her and her face lit up with joy. They had picnics by the river and went fishing in the mountain streams. She told him about growing up in Philadelphia, about her love of books and music, about the dreams she'd had before her parents had arranged her marriage to Oliver. "I wanted to be a teacher," she confessed one day as they sat by the water. "I loved learning and I wanted to share that with others, but my parents said it wasn't suitable for a girl of my station. They said my job was to make a good marriage and produce heirs. You could still teach." "There are kids around Durango who could use schooling." Her eyes lit up. "Do you really think so?" "I know so. Emma mentioned just the other week that the town's been trying to find a teacher. The last one moved back east after she got married. I would love that. I would absolutely love that." And so, Ophelia became the new schoolteacher of Durango. She taught in a small one-room schoolhouse on the edge of town, and the children adored her. She had a gift for making even the most difficult subjects interesting, and she treated each student with patience and respect. Dalton would sometimes ride into town at the end of the school day just to watch her with the children, to see the way she'd light up when a struggling student finally understood a concept. The townspeople, who had been suspicious of her at first, gradually warmed to her. She was friendly and hardworking and clearly devoted to both the children and to Dalton. Even Mrs. Morrison had to admit that perhaps she'd been wrong about the mysterious stranger who'd arrived without shoes or a name. 4 months after their wedding, Ophelia discovered she was pregnant. She told Dalton one evening after supper, her eyes nervous but excited. "A baby," he said it in wonder, his hand moving instinctively to her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby. Are you happy?" "Happy," he laughed and swept her up into his arms, spinning her around. "I'm over the moon. We're going to be parents," she laughed with him, her arms around his neck. "I was so worried you'd think it was too soon. Are you kidding? This is the best news ever." He set her down gently. "We need to get you to the doctor, make sure everything's all right. And we need to start preparing. Build a cradle, get baby clothes, and you'll have to stop teaching once you start showing. You need to rest and take care of yourself." "Dalton, I'm pregnant, not dying. I can still work." "I know, but I want you to be careful. You and the baby are the most important things in the world to me." She touched his face tenderly. "We're both going to be fine. I promise." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Ophelia continued teaching until she was 6 months along, then reluctantly turned her duties over to a substitute. She spent her days preparing the nursery in the small room off their bedroom, sewing tiny clothes and blankets. Dalton built a beautiful cradle from pine wood, carving little horses and mountains into the headboard. They were happy. Completely, thoroughly happy. Which is probably why they should have known it couldn't last. The letter arrived on a cold February morning, delivered by the town's postal clerk. It was addressed to Dalton Shepard and bore the seal of a Philadelphia law firm. Dalton opened it with trembling hands while Ophelia watched, her face pale. "Dear Mr. Shepard, we represent Mr. Oliver Rutherford in the matter of his marriage to Miss Ophelia Rutherford, formerly Miss Ophelia Rivers. It has come to our attention that you entered into a fraudulent marriage with Miss Rutherford, while she was still legally wed to our client. We are prepared to take legal action to have your marriage annulled, and to have Miss Rutherford return to her rightful husband. However, Mr. Rutherford is a generous man and is willing to forego such action in exchange for adequate compensation. He is prepared to accept the sum of $10,000 in exchange for releasing his claim on Miss Rutherford. If this sum is paid in full by March 15th, 1879, he will agree to a quiet divorce and will make no further claims on the lady or any children she may bear in the future. If payment is not received by the specified date, we will proceed with legal action. Be advised that Mr. Rutherford has friends in high places and is prepared to use every resource at his disposal to reclaim what is rightfully his. We await your response. Dalton read the letter twice, his anger building with each word. He's trying to blackmail us. $10,000. Ophelia's voice was hollow. We don't have that kind of money. Even if we did, I wouldn't pay it. He's got no legal standing. Our marriage is valid. But what if he's right? What if a judge decides in his favor? They could take me back. They could take our baby. Her hand moved protectively to her swollen belly. That's not going to happen. I won't let it. But despite his confident words, Dalton was worried. He knew that money and connections could sway justice, especially when it came to matters of marriage and women's rights. The law still saw women as property in many ways, and a powerful man like Oliver Rutherford could twist that to his advantage. He rode into town and spoke with the only lawyer in Durango, a young man named Robert Hayes, who'd only been practicing for a few years. Hayes read the letter and shook his head. This is a tricky situation, Dalton. Technically, if Ophelia was still married to Rutherford when she married you, then your marriage isn't valid. But there are precedents for marriages being annulled due to duress or abuse. We could argue that her marriage to Rutherford was never legitimate in the first place. So we fight it. We can try. But I'll be honest with you, it's going to be an uphill battle. Rutherford has resources we can't match. And the law isn't exactly on the side of women who run away from their husbands. Then what do we do? Hayes was quiet for a moment. There might be another option. If you could get evidence of the abuse, testimony from people who witnessed it, that might help our case. Do you know anyone back in Philadelphia who might be willing to speak up? Ophelia was reluctant when Dalton suggested it. The servants knew, but they'd never testify against Oliver. They need their jobs. And my family wouldn't help. They made it clear where they stood. There must be someone. A friend, maybe, she thought for a long moment. There was one person. My childhood friend, Margaret. She visited me a few times after I married Oliver. She saw the bruises. She begged me to leave, but I don't even know where she is now. Do you know her full name? Where she lived? Margaret Ashford. She lived with her aunt on Walnut Street in Philadelphia. Dalton sent a telegram that very day to Margaret Ashford at the Walnut Street address, explaining the situation and begging for her help. Then they waited. The response came 2 weeks later, not by telegram but by letter. Margaret not only remembered Ophelia, but had been trying to find her ever since she'd disappeared. She was willing to testify about the abuse she'd witnessed. More than that, she'd found 2 of the servants from the Rutherford household who'd been dismissed and were angry enough at their former employer to speak the truth. "She's coming here," Ophelia said, reading the letter with tears streaming down her face. "She's bringing witnesses. She's going to help us. See, I told you we'd find a way." Ophelia threw her arms around him, her pregnant belly pressed between them. "I can't believe this is happening. I can't believe we might actually win. We're going to win. I'm sure of it now." Margaret Ashford arrived in Durango 3 weeks later, accompanied by 2 middle-aged women who'd both worked in the Rutherford household. Margaret was a tall, sturdy woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She embraced Ophelia fiercely when they met. "I've been so worried about you," she said. "When you disappeared, I didn't know if you were alive or dead. Oliver told everyone you'd lost your mind, that you'd run off into the night and probably died somewhere, but I knew better. I knew you were stronger than that." "I barely made it here," Ophelia admitted. "If Dalton hadn't found me, I don't know what would have happened." Margaret turned to study Dalton. "So you're the man who saved my friend." "I just did what anyone would have done." "No, most people would have looked the other way. You didn't." "Thank you for that." The two former servants, Mrs. Henshaw and Miss Porter, had damning stories to tell. They'd both witnessed Oliver's violence toward Ophelia. They'd seen the bruises, heard the screams, cleaned up blood. They'd been dismissed when they dared to suggest that Ophelia might need a doctor. "He's a monster," Mrs. Henshaw said flatly, "and we're not afraid to say so anymore. He can't hurt us now." With this testimony, Robert Hayes felt confident they could win the case. He filed a response to Rutherford's lawyers, outlining the evidence of abuse and arguing that the first marriage should be annulled, making Ophelia's marriage to Dalton legally valid. Rutherford's lawyers responded by demanding a hearing in front of a territorial judge. The hearing was set for late March in the territorial courthouse in Santa Fe. Dalton and Ophelia made the long journey south, accompanied by Robert Hayes, Margaret, and the two servants. Ophelia was 8 months pregnant by then, and the trip was difficult for her, but she insisted on being there. "This is my fight," she said. "I'm not going to hide while other people decide my future." The courthouse in Santa Fe was an imposing adobe building that seemed designed to intimidate. Oliver Rutherford was there with his high-priced lawyers, looking smug and confident. When he saw Ophelia's pregnant belly, something ugly flickered across his face. "Carrying another man's bastard," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "How far you've fallen, Ophelia." Dalton had to physically restrain himself from punching the man. "Watch your mouth, or what?" "You'll hit me. Go ahead. Assault me in front of witnesses. That will help your case tremendously." The judge, a stern-looking man named Albert Thornton, called the hearing to order. For 2 days, lawyers on both sides presented their arguments. Rutherford's team painted Ophelia as an unstable, unfaithful woman who'd abandoned her legal husband to run off with a cowboy. They claimed she'd seduced Dalton into a sham marriage and was now trying to legitimize her infidelity. But when Hayes called his witnesses, the tide began to turn. Margaret testified about the bruises she'd seen, the fear in Ophelia's eyes. Mrs. Henshaw and Miss Porter provided detailed accounts of the abuse they'd witnessed. And finally, Ophelia herself took the stand. She spoke clearly and calmly, recounting the horrors of her marriage to Oliver. She described the beatings, the threats, the terror of living with a man who saw her as property rather than a person. She explained how she'd finally found the courage to run, how she'd walked for days with bleeding feet because anything was better than staying with Oliver Rutherford. "He didn't marry me because he loved me," she said. "He married me because my family had connections he wanted. I was a business transaction to him, and when I didn't perform to his satisfaction, he punished me." She looked directly at the judge. "I may have been legally his wife, but that marriage was a prison, and when I found the key to escape, I took it. I won't apologize for that." Oliver's lawyers tried to discredit her, suggesting she was lying or exaggerating, but the testimony from the independent witnesses was too strong. And when Hayes pointed out that under territorial law, a marriage could be annulled if one party had been coerced, or if the marriage involved fraud, the judge seemed to waver. Finally, after hearing closing arguments, Judge Thornton announced he would take the matter under advisement and issue a ruling within the week. The waiting was agonizing. Dalton and Ophelia stayed in a small hotel in Santa Fe, barely sleeping, holding on to each other through the long nights. Margaret stayed with them, providing what support she could. "Whatever happens, you have people who love you," she told Ophelia. "You're not alone anymore." On the fifth day, a messenger arrived at the hotel with a summons to appear at the courthouse. Judge Thornton was ready to deliver his verdict. They filed into the courtroom, Dalton holding Ophelia's hand tightly. Oliver sat on the opposite side with his lawyers, his expression unreadable. Judge Thornton entered and took his seat. "I have reviewed all the evidence and testimony in this matter," he began. "This is a difficult case involving complicated questions of law and morality. However, after careful consideration, I have reached a decision." Dalton felt Ophelia's grip tighten on his hand. "The evidence presented by the defendant shows a clear pattern of abuse and coercion in the marriage between Mr. Oliver Rutherford and Miss Ophelia Rivers. While the law does provide certain rights to husbands, it does not condone violence or the treatment of a wife as chattel. Furthermore, the testimony suggests that Miss Rivers entered into the marriage under duress, believing she had no other choice due to family pressure." Oliver's face was turning red. "Based on these findings, I am ruling that the marriage between Oliver Rutherford and Ophelia Rivers is hereby annulled. It is as if the marriage never existed. Therefore, the subsequent marriage between Ophelia Rivers and Dalton Shepard is valid and legal in all respects. Mr. Rutherford's claim on the lady is dismissed." The courtroom erupted. Oliver was on his feet, shouting about injustice and corruption. His lawyers were trying to calm him down. Dalton pulled Ophelia into his arms, feeling her shake with sobs of relief. "It's over," he whispered into her hair. "It's really over. You're free." "We're free," she corrected him. "We're free to be together, to be a family." Margaret was crying too, hugging both of them. Robert Hayes was grinning from ear to ear. Even the judge was smiling slightly as he banged his gavel to restore order. Oliver stormed out of the courtroom, his lawyers scrambling to follow. Dalton knew they might appeal the decision, but Hayes seemed confident it would stand. The evidence had been too strong, the testimony too compelling. They left Santa Fe the next day, eager to get home to the ranch. The journey back to Durango was filled with laughter and relief and hope. Ophelia's baby was due any day now, and she wanted to be home when the time came. They made it back with just 2 days to spare. On a warm April evening, with Margaret acting as midwife and Dalton pacing the floor outside the bedroom, Ophelia gave birth to a healthy baby boy. "He's perfect," Margaret said, emerging from the bedroom with a bundle in her arms. "Absolutely perfect, and your wife wants to see you." Dalton rushed into the room. Ophelia was propped up against pillows, looking exhausted but radiant. She held out her arms and Margaret placed the baby in them. "Dalton, meet your son." He sat on the edge of the bed, staring down at the tiny face peeking out from the blanket. The baby had a shock of dark hair and his mother's delicate features. As Dalton watched, the little eyes opened, revealing a deep blue that might eventually turn brown or might stay blue. "He's beautiful," Dalton whispered. "He's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. What should we name him?" Ophelia asked. Dalton thought for a moment. "How about Daniel, after my father? Daniel Shepard, Daniel." Ophelia smiled. "I love it. Daniel Shepard, welcome to the world." Little Daniel proved to be a happy, healthy baby. He had his mother's smile and his father's stubborn determination. As he grew from infant to toddler, the ranch rang with his laughter. Dalton would carry him around on his shoulders, showing him the horses and cattle, teaching him about the land. Ophelia sang to him and read to him, already preparing him for the day he'd start school. Margaret stayed with them for a few months before returning to Philadelphia, but she promised to visit every year. And she kept that promise, arriving each spring with gifts for Daniel and stories about the city. 2 years after Daniel's birth, Ophelia gave birth to twin girls, Emma and Alice. The ranch house that had once been so quiet was now full of noise and chaos and love. Dalton built an addition to the house, adding more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Ophelia returned to teaching when the children were old enough, taking all three of them with her to the schoolhouse. Daniel loved learning just as much as his mother did, and the twins were terrors who kept all the other students entertained with their antics. The years passed in a blur of happiness. The ranch prospered. The children grew. Dalton and Ophelia's love only deepened with time. They still sat on the porch together in the evenings, watching the sunset, holding hands the way they had in those early days. "You ever think about that day I walked into town?" Ophelia asked one evening when the children were asleep and the house was quiet. "All the time. I was so scared. I thought my life was over. I thought I'd never be happy again. And now," she smiled at him, "now I can't imagine being happier. You gave me everything, Dalton. A home, a family, a life worth living. You gave me myself back. You gave me just as much. Before you arrived, I was just going through the motions, working the ranch, existing but not really living. You changed all that. You made me believe in love again, in the possibility of building something real with another person. I still can't believe you married me." "A stranger who showed up with no shoes and wouldn't even tell you her real name," he laughed. "Best decision I ever made, although I have to admit, I'm glad you eventually told me your name. Ophelia suits you much better than the one I picked. I don't know, I kind of liked being Olivia. It felt like a fresh start, like I could be whoever I wanted to be instead of who everyone expected me to be. You're both. You're Ophelia, the educated woman from Philadelphia who loves books and teaching. And you're Olivia, the brave woman who walked through hell to find freedom. You're all of it, and I love every part of you." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I love you too, more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." They sat like that as the stars came out, content in the silence and the warmth of being together. Inside the house, they could hear one of the twins calling out in her sleep. Ophelia started to get up, but Dalton stopped her. "I'll check on her. You rest." He went inside and found little Alice sitting up in bed, her face scrunched up like she might cry. "Papa." "I'm here, sweetheart." "Did you have a bad dream?" She nodded, reaching her arms up to him. He scooped her up and sat in the rocking chair, holding her close. "Tell me about it." "There was a monster. A big, scary one." "Well, there are no monsters here." "I won't let any monsters near you or your mama or your brother and sister." "Promise." "I promise. You're safe here, Alice. This is your home and nothing bad is going to happen to you." She yawned and snuggled against his chest. "Sing the song, Papa, the one about the stars." He sang softly, a lullaby his own mother had sung to him when he was small. By the time he finished, Alice was fast asleep. He carried her back to bed and tucked her in, then checked on Emma and Daniel, all three children sleeping peacefully. He returned to the porch where Ophelia was still sitting, looking out at the night. "Alice okay?" she asked. "Just a nightmare. She's fine now. You're so good with them, with all of us." "I learned from the best. My mother raised Sarah and me on her own after Dad died. She showed me what real strength looks like, what real love looks like." He paused. "You remind me of her sometimes, that same determination, that same fierce protectiveness when it comes to the people you love. I wish I could have met her. She would have adored you. And she would have been over the moon about the grandchildren." They fell quiet again, and Dalton thought about how much his life had changed since that hot July day when Ophelia had walked into Durango. He'd been content enough before, but he hadn't known what he was missing. Hadn't known that life could be this full, this rich, this meaningful. "What are you thinking about?" Ophelia asked. "Just how lucky I am. How one moment, one decision can change everything. If I'd been at the ranch instead of in town that day, someone else would have found you." Or maybe no one would have and you would have just kept walking. We might never have met. But we did meet, and I don't think that was an accident. I think we were meant to find each other. I believe that too. More years passed. Daniel grew into a strong, intelligent young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. The twins were beautiful and spirited, with their mother's green eyes and their father's sense of adventure. A few years after the twins were born, Ophelia had one more child, another boy they named Joseph, who was quiet and thoughtful and loved to draw. The ranch continued to thrive. Dalton bought more land, increased the herd. He became a respected figure in the community, known for his fairness and hard work. Ophelia's school became one of the best in the territory, with students coming from miles around to learn from her. They never heard from Oliver Rutherford again. Word reached them through Margaret that he'd remarried, some other poor woman from a wealthy family. They felt sorry for her but knew there was nothing they could do. Some people never changed. As Dalton and Ophelia grew older, they watched their children grow up and start families of their own. Daniel married a sweet girl from town and took over most of the ranch operations. Emma became a teacher like her mother. Alice married a doctor and moved to Denver but visited often. Joseph became an artist, his paintings of the Colorado landscape gaining recognition throughout the territory. And through it all, Dalton and Ophelia remained devoted to each other. They still sat on the porch together in the evenings. They still held hands. They still looked at each other with the same love and wonder they'd felt in those early days. One evening, when they were both well into their 60s, Dalton turned to Ophelia and said, "Do you remember what I told you that first day? That you could have my shoes and my name?" She smiled. "Of course I remember. It was the kindest thing anyone had ever said to me. I want you to know that I meant it. Everything I have, everything I am, has always been yours. From that first moment you owned my heart. And you've had mine. You saved me, Dalton. In every way a person can be saved. We saved each other." She leaned in and kissed him, soft and sweet, the way she had on their wedding night all those years ago. And Dalton knew with absolute certainty that he would do it all again. Every moment, every challenge, every joy. Because it had led him here, to this woman, to this life, to this perfect, imperfect, beautiful existence they'd built together. The sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. And Dalton Shepard, holding the hand of his beloved wife, thought that life couldn't possibly get any better than this. He'd been a simple rancher, content with his solitary existence, until the day a woman arrived without shoes or a name she'd give. He'd offered her both of his, never imagining that in return she would give him the whole world. Their legacy lived on through their children and grandchildren. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through generations. The schoolhouse where Ophelia taught was eventually renamed in her honor. And in Durango, Colorado, people still told the story of the mysterious woman who'd stumbled into town on a hot summer day, and the cowboy who'd loved her enough to give her everything. Daniel, their firstborn, told his own children the story when they asked about their grandmother. "She was the bravest person I ever knew," he would say. "She walked away from everything she'd ever known because she believed she deserved better, and she was right. She deserved the world, and my father gave it to her." The twins, now grandmothers themselves, would add their own memories. Emma remembered her mother teaching her to read by the fireplace on winter evenings. Alice recalled her father teaching her to ride, his patient voice encouraging her when she was scared. Joseph painted a portrait of his parents that hung in the ranch house for generations, capturing them as they were in those early years, young and in love and full of hope. As Dalton and Ophelia entered their final years together, they moved slower, but their love never diminished. They spent their days in the garden Ophelia had planted years ago, or sitting in the shade watching their grandchildren play. They told stories about the old days, laughing over memories that had grown sweeter with time. "You have any regrets?" Ophelia asked him one day. Dalton thought about it seriously. "Only one. I wish I'd had more time with you. A whole lifetime doesn't seem like enough." "We've had 52 years together, Dalton. That's more than most people get." "I know, and I'm grateful for every single day, but I'd take 100 more if I could." She squeezed his hand. "Me too. But whatever time we have left, let's make the most of it." And they did. They continued to find joy in the simple things: morning coffee shared on the porch, the sound of their grandchildren's laughter, the changing seasons painting the landscape in different colors. Each other's presence, constant and comforting and absolutely necessary. Dalton passed away peacefully in his sleep on a cool autumn night, with Ophelia beside him holding his hand. He was 78 years old and had lived a life full of meaning and love. His last words to her were the same words he'd said nearly every day of their marriage. "I love you, Ophelia Shepard. You're the best thing that ever happened to me." Ophelia followed him 6 months later, unable to imagine a world without him in it. She died in the same bed where they'd held each other through countless nights, where they'd whispered their dreams and fears and hopes. Her children were with her at the end, and she smiled at them through her tears. "Take care of each other," she said. "Love each other fiercely, and never ever settle for less than you deserve. Your father taught me that. He showed me what real love looks like. I want that for all of you." They buried her next to Dalton on a hillside overlooking the ranch. The headstone was simple: Ophelia Shepard, beloved wife and mother, 1856–1935. She arrived without shoes or a name and found both, along with a love that lasted forever. At the funeral, Daniel stood before the gathered crowd and told the story one more time. The story of how his mother had walked into Durango with nothing, and how his father had seen past the dirt and fear to the remarkable woman underneath. How a simple act of kindness had blossomed into a love story for the ages. "They taught us that love isn't about perfection," he said. "It's about choosing each other every single day. It's about seeing someone at their worst and loving them anyway. It's about building something together, brick by brick, year by year, until you've created a life that neither of you could have imagined alone." The ranch continued to thrive for generations, a testament to everything Dalton and Ophelia had built. Their story was passed down through the family, growing richer with each telling. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun set over the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, people swore they could see two figures on the porch of the old ranch house, sitting close together, holding hands, watching the day fade into night. Because some loves are too strong to be contained by a single lifetime. Some loves echo through the ages, inspiring everyone who hears their story. And the love between Dalton Shepard and Ophelia Shepard, which began on a dusty street in Durango, Colorado in 1878, was exactly that kind of love. Their great-great-grandchildren still live on the ranch today, working the same land, looking out at the same mountains, carrying on the legacy of hard work and fierce devotion that Dalton and Ophelia established all those years ago. The schoolhouse still stands in town, though it's now a museum dedicated to Ophelia's memory and her contributions to education in the territory. And when young people in Durango ask about the name on the old building, the elders tell them the story. They speak of a woman who arrived broken and afraid, and a man who offered her everything he had without asking for anything in return. They talk about how that simple act of compassion grew into a partnership that changed not just two lives, but generations of lives. That's what love is supposed to be, they say. Not a prison, but a freedom. Not a taking, but a giving. Not a diminishing, but a becoming. Dalton and Ophelia showed us that. They proved that it's possible to start over, to build something beautiful from the ashes of something terrible. They showed us that one person's kindness can change the entire trajectory of someone's life. The story ends, as all good stories do, with hope. Hope that somewhere out there, other people are finding each other against impossible odds. Hope that kindness still matters, that love still conquers, that broken things can be made whole again. Hope that when someone arrives in our lives without shoes or a name they'll give, we'll have the courage to offer them both of ours, and the wisdom to recognize it as the privilege it is. Because that's what Dalton Shepard understood on that hot July day in 1878, when he saw a stranger stumbling down the main street of Durango with bleeding feet and desperate eyes. He understood that sometimes the greatest gifts we give are the simplest ones. A name, a pair of shoes, a safe place to rest, a second chance at life. And from those simple gifts, miracles can grow. The woman who arrived without shoes or a name became Ophelia Shepard, beloved wife, devoted mother, respected teacher, and the heart of a family that would span generations. The cowboy who offered her both his shoes and his name became Dalton Shepard, not just a rancher but a man who understood that true strength lies in compassion, that real courage means protecting the vulnerable, and that the greatest legacy anyone can leave is a love story worth remembering. And so their story lives on, told and retold, a reminder that in the wildness of the West, in the harshness of those frontier days, the most revolutionary act was still and always would be love. Simple, pure, transformative love. The kind that sees a person at their lowest and says, "You are worth saving." The kind that builds a home out of nothing but determination and devotion. The kind that lasts not just a lifetime but forever. In the end, that's what everyone remembers. Not the legal battles or the hardships or the struggles. They remember the love. They remember how two souls found each other when they needed it most. They remember that when everything else fell away, when all the obstacles were overcome and all the battles were won, what remained was Dalton and Ophelia, sitting together on their porch, hands entwined, watching the sunset paint the Colorado sky in impossible colors. That image, more than anything else, is their legacy, a testament to the enduring power of love, a promise that even in the darkest times, even when we've lost everything, even when we arrive somewhere new without shoes or a name we'll give, there might be someone waiting who will offer us both of theirs. Someone who will see us not as we appear in our brokenness, but as we truly are in our wholeness. Someone who will stand beside us and say, "You are home now. You are safe. You are loved." And that is how the story ends, and also how it continues, echoing through time, inspiring new generations to choose love over fear, compassion over judgment, hope over despair. The story of the woman who arrived without shoes or a name and the cowboy who said, "You can have both of mine," and in doing so, created something that would last forever. The ranch still stands, weathered but strong, a monument to everything they built together. The mountains still rise in the distance, eternal and unchanging. The river still flows along the eastern boundary, its waters carrying memories of two people who found each other and decided to build a life worth living. And somewhere in the fabric of that place, in the very air and soil, the love of Dalton and Ophelia Shepard remains, as real and present as the day they first spoke their vows and promised to stand together against whatever the world might throw at them. They kept that promise, not just on their wedding day but every day after, through joy and sorrow, triumph and struggle, youth and age. And when their time finally came to leave this world, they left behind more than just children and grandchildren and a prosperous ranch. They left behind proof that love, real love, the kind that transforms and heals and endures, is not just a fairy tale but an achievable reality. All it takes is the courage to offer everything you have to someone who has nothing, and the faith to believe that somehow, impossibly, it will be enough. It was enough for Dalton and Ophelia. More than enough. It was everything. And their story, passed down through generations, continues to remind us that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with the simplest acts of kindness. A hand extended to a stranger. A pair of shoes offered to someone in need. A name given freely to someone who cannot give their own. These small gestures, made with an open heart, have the power to change everything. That is the lesson of their lives. That is the gift they left behind. And that is why, more than a century after Ophelia first stumbled into Durango with bleeding feet and terror in her eyes, people still tell her story, still marvel at the love she found, still draw hope from the knowledge that even in our darkest moments, salvation might be just around the corner, wearing a cowboy's boots and offering everything with a gentle smile and words that change the course of a life. You can have both of mine.